Hello, this is Michael Hexter. Welcome to my Politics 2100 video cast here on YouTube. So this is the first episode of two that I'm grouping together that are going to apply some insights from psychoanalytic psychology and ideas about the human mind, more generally, not just from psychoanalysis, and politics, and so and the contemporary politics. So please bear with me. This is very relevant to current political actions that people are taking in a wide spectrum of the political spectrum, or a wide range of the political spectrum. So it's not purely of academic or even of very specific interest if you have a specific interest in psychology or political psychology. So anyway, so this episode I'm calling, this first episode of two, I'm calling Neofascists, Reactionaries are trying to trap us in vicious cycles of knee-jerk action and reaction. So this observation is based on what a number of theorists and political commentators have talked about, that the fear-based politics of the neo-fascists, of the GOP, who I'm calling neo-fascist, and also the surrounding ecosystem of media, right-wing media, and and also operatives, political operatives who may or may not be identified specifically with the Republican Party. That anyway, that this ecosystem, it has as a goal to keep people in a constant state of fear and a constant state of anger or fear or emotion, continually pulling the emotions of anger and fear and scorn and disgust, very basic human emotions. They're trying to keep those at a boil within as many people as they can possibly reach, but in particular their base of that tend to watch things like Fox News or OAN or Newsmax, and also in the surrounding environment of those people. And so this is so one way to think about this, and this is not the psychoanalytic perspective that I was talking about earlier, but there's a concept from both neuroscience and also psychology to some degree, but more neuroscience, called the triune brain. So the brain is divided, there's a reptilian side, there's a mammalian part of the brain, and then there's the sort of the cortex, which is the sort of human side of the brain. And so the idea is that it's kind of a way to sort of crudely differentiate between different developmental, sort of across the development, the biological development of nervous systems overall, in vertebrates, that we have reptilian, or even fish have a certain type of brain, or the limbic system, and the lower autonomic nervous system is considered to be quote unquote reptilian, and then above it there's more the affective and emotional side of the brain that's more about relationships and forming relationships. That's sort of the mammalian side. And then there's the neocortex, and the part that's considered more the human, specifically human functions that are, the human beings have a large neocortex and so forth and so on, where we have many of our language abilities and cognitive abilities that we associate mostly with human beings, though not exclusively with human beings. But anyway, so the neo-fascists are trying essentially to bypass the human and also even the mammalian side of our brain, and get us to be reacting constantly in the areas of the brain that were developed, millennia, or not more than millennia, millions of years ago in our ancestors, our non-human ancestor animals, and that are about simply simple self-preservation, simple, and also even in isolation from other animals, from other organisms. And it's not really particularly, there are some biases associated with this division of the brain, because many of our functions, we are social animals, and so the social aspect, there's not this sort of basic reptilianness that's about being isolated and alone and just reacting as an isolated individual. We join society early on in our development through our, in the first, months and years of our lives. So it's the idea that sort of there's some kind of basic reptilian isolated individual there is a political element to that differentiation, but still in the context of the different political flavors that we have available, not flavors, I don't want to use that word, because different political ideologies and different political orientations that we have, that it seems as though the right wing is definitely trying to keep people away from their rational cognitive functions, the higher functions, and to reduce us to our reactive, automatic, and fear, mostly self-preservative emotions like fear and anger, and not to emotions like love, or emotions like trust and communication, connection. And so so that this differentiation between different levels of the brain as to reptilian, mammalian, and human, that differentiation has a little bit of explanatory power, or some explanatory power in trying to understand the appeals and the attempt to section off and cut out both certain emotions, then also certain higher capacities of human beings. And it's an operative and useful tool for these sociopathic operatives, who are sociopathic also in the sense of they want to tear apart society, or just use society for their own purposes or for the purposes of their patrons, and they feel no compunction and no sense of obligation, mutual obligation, or trust, or maintaining trust, let's say, with other people, that they see that as purely an instrument to power and to wealth accumulation for them or for their patrons. And so anyway, so that's the sort of kind of basic neuroscience perspective that I think has something to say. But then when we talk about a psychoanalytic approach to that perspective, that there is a sense in which these cycles of reactivity, of action and reaction, can be described in a way that's about interpersonal interaction, and how the way to get out of this we can call reptilian state of being constantly on edge and reacting to the newest outrage, the newest offense, and also to stir up the whatever anger that is supposed to be being touched in us, and then to constantly respond to that, puts us in the situation of being in this state of anxiety and tension. So a psychoanalytic perspective is that this creates a repetition or a cycle of repetition, a vicious cycle which needs to be broken eventually. So in order for change to happen, in order for people to be able to step beyond their current state of going nowhere or even spiraling downward. And so now sort of this taking a step back and this is kind of a little bit of a rabbit hole, you could call it, or a excursus or whatever from this discussion about politics. But there is, in traditional psychoanalysis, the idea of a repetition compulsion. In other words, people, when they're in a neurotic state, or when they're in a or even worse, some other psychopathology, some kind of that they, at least the very traditional view is that somehow they have a neurosis, a drive to repeat something. This is Freud took this in a way from Nietzsche, the eternal return, das ewige Wiederkehr desgleichen, which means that you're stuck. Sort of history is this circular thing. It doesn't linearly progress forward so much as stay stuck. And now Freud said that this was a problem, this is an issue, and he was not a great, I think, therapist in some ways. He thought that somehow people would discover this through a great insight, through some. He was a better theorist than he was a therapist, in likely in terms of how. I mean, I wasn't there, I don't know, but he certainly had brilliant ideas. But then I don't think he could explain well what an activity of a good clinician or a good therapist who would help people get out of this cycle of doing the same thing over and over again. He sort of implied that this was something that was inside the person, that had been embedded in them from early childhood, and that they needed to somehow get an insight, get a blinding insight, through therapy, through psychoanalysis, to understand, to get an intellectual understanding of their how they were blocked in some way by, or where their drives were being frustrated, or how they were not adequately expressing their needs and or fulfilling them in a way that was mature and adult and according to the social, and unlike some people who interpreted Freud as being someone who wanted to liberate the drives, he was more someone who wanted to sort of, for people to accept them, but then not just act them out, or just get willy-nilly get gratification. There were various schools that branched out from Freud that took him to mean to be the prophet of licentiousness, or basically trying to either get sex or whatever it is, particularly sexuality, as being the main curative thing. And this was something that Wilhelm Reich, who was he went off in that direction, and also other clinicians who were not necessarily psychoanalytic and were not in the psychoanalytic tradition at all, took him to mean that was the curative thing about, and his effect was also on culture more generally. Like, our culture became more permissive. Some of it inspired by at least how Freud was interpreted or misinterpreted. But anyway, that's I think we need to step beyond Freud within the psychoanalytic tradition and also outside of it to understand how people can really overcome, how people get stuck in patterns of thinking and behaving and acting that is counterproductive, that is in some way harmful to them or harmful to other people. And I think one needs to go to, again, I'm sorry to go into this mini history here of psychoanalysis and psychoanalytic ideas, but and one doesn't need to follow this all and study it necessarily, but one needs to go to, I think, the object relations school, which is an offshoot of Freud. It's in the psychoanalytic tradition, associated with Melanie Klein and a few other theorists like D.W. Winnicott, Ronald Fairbairn, and others, to understand more about how one could help people become, could step out of neurotic and destructive patterns of behavior. And this is just to sort of bring you back to the big picture here. We're trying to bring our society out of a spiraling downward, okay, in terms of behaving and acting, and also in terms of political life. Okay, so we're trying to, and the one of the tools I'm trying to offer here is this tool. Within the object relation school, there are ideas where you can understand how people get stuck. And one of those ideas is about how generally people in society, also not only from inside their psyches, imagine the world to be a certain way and act inside, entirely encased in their own psychology and projecting outward their thoughts and fantasies, and just sort of acting within sort of their own bubble, and just finding other people who they project onto, but they're entirely encased in their own world. That there is a tendency within Freud within the Freudian, and that what became ego psychology, which is the sort of the most orthodox school of Freud, that is now contemporarily still practiced, which is called ego psychology, and that imagines a psyche that is encased in itself, that is just, there's a series of agencies within the psyche, the ego, the superego, and the id, and that what the psychoanalyst is doing and what the patient is doing ultimately is sort of rearranging this interior furniture through insight, through so forth and so on, through talking, through experiencing, they're rearranging this so that they become more adapted, mature, less hysterically miserable, and just ordinarily unhappy is what Freud had as a goal for his therapy, and maybe even somewhat happy, but still not hysterically miserable. That was the goal, was to get out of hysterical misery, which is a good idea. So but anyway, but the object relations school says, no, wait a minute, people are enmeshed in relationships with other people, and that the neuroses that people have, these vicious cycles, okay, of this repetition compulsion, is really also involving with other people, and it's not just, those people are not just screens on which to project, but they are really affecting and changing the biology even of each person, is affecting the other person in some ways. I mean, I'm elaborating and making, in some sense, clearer, I think, certain aspects of object relations ideas. So I'm adding something that might be called interpersonal, which is even a step further away from the sort of Freudian bubble. Everybody is in their own neurotic bubble. So anyway, so the way that in the psychoanalytic school called object relations. So there's a certain trend or thought that people are using something called projective identification to form relationships and also call upon other people and draw out from other people certain reactions from them, so that there is really a 2 or 3 or 4 or multi-person world of psychological world that is involving the internal worlds of each of the individuals involved, but also they're creating a social relationship, an object relation, which is kind of not a great word for a relationship between people, but anyway, but the people recruit other people to play roles, and they play the roles. So in other words, so you feel yourself to be drawn into the world of the other person, and you act certain ways that you may not have acted before, or it corresponds to something that within you, that's something within them. You somehow choose people to be around where you can create these dramas or these interactions, which reinforce things that in some people, obviously, it's that kind of interaction is productive and it grows and you develop together and you become, you're not unhappy or you're less unhappy, or it gets you somewhere where you want to go, and you don't feel blocked or in a cycle of repetition and so forth and so on. But there are other times in which people are in these cycles of repetition and of and vicious cycles. And so, and what now to sort of to get back to the original topic, that the neo-fascist plan, in some sense, for society is to enmesh people in a constant cycle of action and reaction, that where the leaders of this movement, or the both the media organizations and also the political leaders who are trying to get people to become involved with and to think, or not to think really, but to react constantly, and to think only marginally, and to think in a repeated and automatic kind of way, and to absorb and to regurgitate propaganda, is that they represent for people a certain type, or a certain ideal type, or whatever it is, that so that they absorb the propaganda, and then they continue to act, and they not only absorb, but they act it out, and they feel compelled to do so. They feel trapped, or they don't realize that they're trapped, but they act as if they are trapped by, and they are enmeshed in this world. And so and they use certain bait. Some of the bait is the sense of release that some of the people, like the base of the right wing, they feel the catharsis of hate and of resentment, and that the right wing offers people. So this world of people constantly repeating and constantly reacting in a knee-jerk reaction is something that is one of the things that's particularly sticky in the neo-fascist way of and fascist and neo-fascist way. And one of the key dynamics in this is masochism and sadism. So cruelty and submission, okay? And so this is enacted over and over again in different ways, and it's played out either in the sort of a third person way, or the leaders literally you know, abuse their followers and abuse also abuse other people, that like they basically they say that, you know, that they don't offer any other option other than, you know, you can either be my favored object of abuse, or you can be the worst, the people who are, you know, either, you know, the lower orders, or the, you know, the all-powerful Jews, okay, you know, because there's much anti-Semitism in fascist worldviews in general. But often there's both the sort of the outcast, the sort of, there's the powerful and dangerous outcasts, you know, often stylized as Jews, or often, you know, thought to be various Jewish individuals, or also the less powerful, scorned outcasts that are considered that what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has recently described as supremacist, or the supremacists, you know, the objects of scorn and hatred, and scorn and derision and devaluation, to enable the grandiose inflation of the supremacist, which the neo-fascists, what I'm calling neo-fascists, are one brand or one flavor of supremacists who are trying to create this imaginary dynamic, and also in reality they're trying to enact it via the use of the state, and to reinforce this hierarchy, and where they inflate their own value, and by devaluing others, and by disparaging others, by casting out a negative emotional freight onto others. And so anyway, this is part one, and I'm going to bring this together in part two to describe what I think anti-fascists and progressives should be doing, and leaders, really political leaders of any civilized. So it's really, the prospect is barbarism, okay, in a society that is being turned constantly, and where discourse, where thinking, where our ability to think, where our ability to discuss in a public forum is being undermined, that it turns us to barbarism, to a society that is not a democracy, and also a society that is barbaric, and is where law, where there's no rule of law, where you know, in the sense of a law that's written down, that is administered fairly, but more, if there is law, or if there is something that calls itself law, it is arbitrarily enforced, and it is usually it's just simply an exercise of raw power, often via violence, and this is the tendency within neo-fascism, and its attraction to violence, and its attraction to simply power for its own sake. So and that one of the methods that they get to that point is that they interrupt, they stimulate people's emotions, what I called earlier the reptilian brain, or and keep people in that state by constantly creating these interactions that create this vicious cycle of action and reaction, where people are off balance all the time, and in a constant state of anger, shock, and without thought, without discussion, and so anyway, in the second part of this video, I will discuss how progressives and political leaders can get us out of this situation. So thank you for listening, and thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please like it, and also please subscribe to this channel, and please share your comments below on this admittedly abstract in some parts, but also I think extremely relevant discussion of the abstractions of human psychology and political psychology, and also our current reality in American society and in some other societies as well, I would believe. So in any case, I look forward to seeing you in the next video.